Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday, Carr. And I'm Kristen Johnson.
And yes, we are. And we had a great show for you guys today.
As usual.
Really excited. We just about had a technical meltdown.
Good Lord, it was terrible.
We went live and I was trying to adjust one of the plugs of the many things that are plugged in here and shut everything down just before going live. So that was fun.
I've never heard him swear so much in my life.
I said
in
a lot
like
of bad
5
words.
seconds.
There's a lot of bad words there. Bad. No children present.
Thank goodness.
Before we get emails,
Gmails, whatever.
Yes, like the no bird people.
Oh my God,
that were plaguing us.
Pigeons are liars.
With emails about the fact that they didn't believe in birds, but we all know that's not true.
Yeah, right? Actually, it was a movement.
Right.
No bird movement.
Yeah, it's actually been a long time since we talked about that. That was kind of fun. That was about a year ago, I think. The no bird movement was taken over. But we got a fantastic show. We're going to get the things and let me just add a little bit of background real quick. Our guest today is Loyd Auerbach. And we're fans.
Big fans.
We got real books by him, and it was making me think about books in general, because the attention span of people gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's like, I used to read things like we did, like Hans Holzer growing up, and reading about the Ed and Lorraine Warren cases and those books and those kind of things. And then there were movies, and they were good. They weren't accurate, but they were good. And then we had the TV shows kind of pop up, and it was like, well, all right, it opened up to more masses because of a shorter attention span. We could watch that now in a half hour, an hour. And, now we get social media, which we're on, so I can't complain too much, right?
Right.
We're on these things, but even the social media gets smaller, and it goes to TikTok. And now you got, 2 minutes to show how haunted a location is, or here's a ghost. All right, see you guys. We're all going to have to eventually just get downloads, like the UFO stuff.
Sure.
The downloads.
The download.
Get it right from a download.
Isn't that in the works? Isn't Elon Musk doing that?
Yeah, the Neuralink.
Yes.
Right. Neuralink.
It is.
Maybe Neuralink will give us that ability, and then we'll know everything right then.
Sure. Don't even get me started.
Let me tell you about our guest. His name is Loyd Auerbach. He's a well-known parapsychologist with 42 years of experience in the field and focused on education, field investigations, and media portrayals of the paranormal. He is a director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, president of the Forever Family Foundation, and vice president of the board of the directors of the Rhine Research Center, all of which we're going to talk about. He is one of 2 principal instructors of online parapsychology courses for the Rhine Education Center, an adjunct professor at Atlantic University, and has taught numerous graduate courses at JFK University, now National University. He is a member of the advisory board of the Windbridge Foundation Center. He holds a master's degree in parapsychology from JFK University. Auerbach is the author and co-author of 9 paranormal-topic books for the general public, including ESP Wars, East and West, Psychic Dreaming, and the classic ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, which I think is that book right there, a parapsychologist's handbook. He is a co-author of the first in a paranormal mystery series called Near Death, a Raney / Daye Investigation, and the second novel in that series is due out mid-year. His media appearances number in the thousands, including New Thinking Aloud, which we're big fans of, Jeffrey Mishlove,
yes,
Oprah, The Unexplained, Larry King Live, The Today Show, and ESPN Sports Center.
Amazing.
Oddly enough,
geez.
I don't know where parapsychology comes into sports, but maybe we'll ask that question. He performs as a professional mentalist, professor paranormal, and is a past president of the Psychic Entertainers Association. He's also earned a certificate as a professional chocolatier. That's right, chocolatier.
Oh, yes. I love him very much.
Yeah, he's a ladies' man out of the gate with that one. Right?
Oh my God, I
Wow.
love him. I love when he talks about it. He has to talk about a little bit, at least. Please.
He lives in San Francisco, and he's here with us now. So let's bring him right on. Hello, Lloyd.
Hi there.
We would like some chocolate.
I would especially, thank you.
I mean, I've got some right here. I've got a whole ton of it right here in my home.
You're amazing. I heard you were talking the other day. You were talking the other day about how the cacao beans are different in certain places, and it was actually an amazing thing that I never really knew. So, because I am I'm a chocolate, what do we call that? Consort? I don't know.
Chocolate lover?
Well, there you go.
Lover.
I am of all chocolate. So I had no idea until I watched one of your talks, and I was like, oh my goodness, I love this man so much, even more.
Yeah, it's something I spent a lot. I just came a personal interest in, and I actually do some professional stuff with that. So,
well, that's great.
Amazing.
See, that's passion. You pick up a hobby and then you love it and it just becomes a thing, and success seems to follow that.
Yeah, and it's where I'm headed. In my retirement, eventually I'm going to see about opening a chocolate shop. So that's
wonderful.
Oh, that's excellent.
We will be there. Seriously.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard my introduction, but it was something I was thinking about this morning. And, you have, a lot of books that are available on Amazon. They're wonderful books. I've read some of them, and we've gone from books to shows to social media, and it's getting to be, you need to get it instantly. The attention span of the audience seems to get smaller and smaller over time.
An attention span of a man.
I know you've been part of this journey.
Yeah,
being involved so long, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've also been teaching public speaking for 30 years now. That's one of the graduate courses I've taught, and I've coached people on that. And it used to be that the general thrust was 30 seconds was people's attention span, just 30 seconds. Now it's about 10. And a number of people, experts in that world, have pointed to the start of the dwindling of attention span to MTV, believe it or not, in the 1980s, because MTV and the videos introduced the quick cuts so that there's not a scene that's like kept for a long time.
Oh, that's true.
And that's kind of progressed over time on television and in movies. And it's also, of course, now in our social media as well. Of course, Twitter gives you a link to something. So hopefully people are actually reading the articles, not just the tweet for that. But other things don't always give you everything you need.
Right. No, I would agree. And it's strange because, there is still books, and I don't know that people have the attention span to read them, but they should. It gives you a chance to really fully take in the information.
Well, actually, what's interesting, the New York Times just did something on Barnes & Noble, and it's really interesting that people have been buying books, especially during the pandemic. People were buying more books, but ebooks have actually been flat. Physical books have actually gone up in sales.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Nice to hear.
Not mine, but others.
I think that's great. I like physical books myself. We have a bookcase behind us, and it's full of all kinds of good stuff.
There's books in the other room.
I am surrounded. Here.
Yes. Yeah, and I think there's something nice about it, but I can't tell you that I don't have a bunch of books on my Kindle as well.
Right. Well,
I do.
I tend to read fiction on my Kindle, and then save the nonfiction for everything else, because fiction is kind of the books are somewhat exchangeable or disposable.
Sure. Oh, that's really interesting. Now, you've been involved in the field, obviously, 42 years. Yeah, you've kind of seen it all. And I know you know a lot about the history of things, and are involved with the Rhine Institute, who are a very interesting story in and of themselves. J.B. Rhine and Louisa. Could you tell us a little bit about how parapsychology came to be for our audience that doesn't understand what really a parapsychologist is?
Sure. First, parapsychology is the study of extrasensory perception, which is information exchange without the use of the normal senses or logical inference. We cover mind over matter psychokinesis. It's the ability of the mind to affect matter and energy both, and physical processes. And then, of course, there's the whole area called survival of bodily death, which is consciousness can exist outside the body and survive the death of the body. And that would include things like apparitions or ghosts and reincarnation and near-death experiences, things like that. So we cover a range, but it's all related to our mind or consciousness. So, for example, we don't deal with UFOs or Atlantis or Bigfoot, unfortunately. If Bigfoot shows up to be psychic, that'll be a different story. But we have to be able to test Bigfoot first.
We've yet to go footing. Let me just tell you, the name actually stems from something completely different.
I figured that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was based on an actually paranormal event that
Nothing
we had.
against the Bigfoot people.
Oh, no.
In fact, I want to go footing because it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I've had interest in cryptozoology and other stuff as well over the years. So historically, parapsychology actually got started as, and is still in some places in the world, called psychical research. So it's psychic with an AL. It started officially in 1882 with the founding of the Society for Psychical Research, which is still operating, in fact, still very robust. And I encourage people to join that organization. Great journal. They do webinars and all sorts of stuff throughout the year. It's a great organization. In 1885, the American Society for Psychical Research got founded. And unfortunately, that's not operating these days, but it was until a few years ago. And then throughout that time, a lot of the focus was, and people hear about the SPR in relation to spirit mediums, especially the physical mediumship stuff. But they were also looking at people's other psychic experiences, precognitive experiences, telepathy. All of that was part of what the SPR did. And they had separate committees. They actually had a haunted house committee, a mediumship committee. They had a committee looking at precognition. So they had different groups of scientists. There were scientists who started the organization. There actually was an older organization, which is still operating, called the Ghost Club in London, which started in around 1860. And that included people like Charles Dickens as members. So
wow.
Dickens was actually a ghost hunter. So you can kind of tell that from some of his stories. You know, he wrote a lot of ghost stories beyond A Christmas Carol. So our field's been around. It's been fairly robust. It's never been a huge field in terms of numbers of people or size, certainly not from funding. But it was very, very active throughout the spirit mediumship world. And then there had been a couple of researchers who only were doing laboratory research. Here in the States, there was a man named John Coover at Leland Stanford Junior College, which is now Stanford University, who published a huge monograph of his experiments, his research. And when J.B. Rhine and Louisa Rhine got involved, it was partly because of the mediumship world that was happening, stuff was going on there. And also their mentor, William McDougall, who was a psychologist at Harvard, took them to a seance with Marjorie, a very famous medium in Boston. They were, I can't use the word unimpressed. Maybe it was an impressive seance, but they didn't buy it. Let's put it that way. And so the decision, because originally they were looking at possibly doing research on spirit mediums, apparently that one seance turned them away from that and to laboratory work with average people. So McDougall took the Rhines to Duke. Eventually, the Rhines started the Parapsychology Laboratory at Duke University. They focused on extrasensory perception and psychokinesis in the lab. They started using or popularizing the term parapsychology, which had been coined years before but hadn't really caught on, and made this really parapsychology for them was focused on laboratory work, except that Louisa spent most of her time and interest in actually gathering people's spontaneous, or I guess this you could say uncontrolled experiences of ESP and PK and occasionally survival related stuff. So that's kind of like the starting point for everything that happened. There were also labs in other parts. There was the Institut Metapsychique, which has been around for well over 100 years in Paris. There is an organization in Germany. There are small organizations around the world that have been around almost as long as the SPR.
Right. And the Rhines themselves wanted to take the spiritualist movement, take it from the seance level, which was an entertainment outlet at
pretty much,
time,
yeah,
to the laboratory and like measure this stuff. And I know people like Ingo Swann looking into his stuff, and I got one of his books here. I heard you talk about him recently, and I'm a big fan of Ingo.
We both are.
Talked about, psychic drawings going back into the 1800s during this period, and people don't realize that they were actually remote viewing, and they were doing the same kind of thing that were later measured by people like this next week.
And there's a researcher named Rene Wacalier, and one of his books is actually in print still, where he did essentially remote viewing, picture duplication, but it was at a distance. So that was effectively remote viewing that was done. A lot of in fact, John Coover, who I mentioned from Stanford, in 1917, when he published his monograph, he had a whole section on what we call remote staring research, the sense of being stared at. So he did some of the initial research on that. And you can find
that movie. Is it Men Who Stare at Goats?
Okay, well, all right. So let's talk about that for a second, because Ingo, of course, became involved with what became known as the Stargate Program. That was the government's remote viewing program. That was 1972, started by Russ Targ and Hal Puthoff. Ingo had been doing research on out-of-body experience at the ASPR before that, and he came up with a method to teach, or first of all, to find people who had an aptitude to doing remote viewing, and then teaching them a basic protocol for that. And that was the start of the program. That program went until 1995. In the 80s, there was a group of military folks, Army folks. John Alexander was one of the leaders of that group. Had nothing to do with Ingo's project whatsoever. And what they wanted to do is become real Jedi. They wanted to learn to develop their own psychic abilities. This was not a scientific research project. They were called, alternatively, I've seen First Earth Battalion or Earth's First Battalion.
Okay.
And there was a martial artist who we had worked with. I had worked at the ASPR for a little bit, and we had worked with him, a guy named Guy Savelli, who's still around in Ohio. And he was able to do some PK and some other things, really interesting stuff. He had taken some of the legendary stuff of Kung Fu and actually made it real. And he trained them. And honestly, from my communication with him at that time, he actually sent me photographs of one of the goats that had been autopsied. They didn't stare at the goats. This was not staring to knock to kill them. It was using a technique in Kung Fu called the dim mak, which is a legendary technique. It's the delayed energy death blow. And it's really not a blow, it's a touch. So you gather your chi and you touch someone, and you basically over the next couple of days, supposedly the person you touched with this energy, their organs disrupt.
Oh my!
I've heard of this. Growing up as a child and being like kind of into Kung Fu, and it was like a death touch, and it was like a thing, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about. Yeah,
except that with the goats, as Guy told me, they didn't stare at the goats; they had to touch the goats. So I think a book called "The Men Who Touched the Goats" would have been taken as a very different kind of book.
Sure,
might have had a different impression there. With
Hollywood.
The
So,
well, it's not even Hollywood. It was John Ronson wrote the book, and I can only imagine he couldn't get that past the publisher. So,
yeah, probably. But that reminds me of psychometry. When if you're going to touch something, yeah,
that's receiving information. Psychometry is a psychic ability. It's actually an easy one for people to learn. It's probably the easiest, I think.
Yeah, it's just psychometry is an interesting subject. We haven't talked a lot about it on our show.
No.
As a psychic ability, we have talked about remote viewing quite a bit and telepathy, but psychometry is where you're reading an object and you know its history from touching it. And if that's true, what is it, do you think, that people are actually, the impressions they're getting? Are they getting the impressions of the consciousness of the person who owned the object, or the object itself having the ability through maybe like a philosophy like panpsychism to maintain that?
A residual, yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a really good it's a good question. There's another possibility that we have precognition, which is knowing things before they happen. There's retrocognition, which is picking up information through time from the past, using that object as a focal point. So that may be what's happening. I tend to, and when I've talked to researchers, we tend to think that the object itself holds information. Now, I want to bring that from there to a haunted house with residual energy. Sure. Because it's the same thing. When you're in a haunted house, you're doing psychometry. It's just you're in the object instead of holding the object. The object is actually holding
it's around you. It's
right.
Big.
Right.
Okay.
So you pick up information on events and emotions that happened in the past.
Okay.
Interesting. But where do you think they exist?
Yeah.
Is it in the object, or is it?
I think it's in the object. I think it's in the object. I do tend to think it's in the object. We still don't know the mechanism by which ESP works, that information comes through. There's some with haunted places, there's some evidence that it might actually be connected to the Earth's magnetic field. That would, in that local area, but that wouldn't really account for an object because that's moving around. wherever you carry it. So it may just be, and there's a number of hypotheses or models that people have thought about. People speculate, of course, all the time.
Sure.
And whether it's quantum, whether it's a quantum field, whether it's the magnetic field of the object, because everything has, even if it's a low-level magnetic field, it's still minor, it's still there, and we may connect with that in some way.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And lately we've been looking at dimensional aspects of it, like a little bit more seriously, because people throw that word around, like quantum a lot, and not really kind of understand what it is they're describing. But, string theory does define these different dimensions, some of which are time-based, right? And the ability to go back through time, and maybe things are held in a time frame and there's a parallel timeline, and that's what we're seeing. I don't know. There
are a number of quantum physicists who have basically said at the quantum level, the arrow of time is both ways. So, there's also that. The question then is, how do we get information from a quantum level, which is really, really, really tiny, into our heads in a conscious way? I mean, that's the big issue.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
It's so small. We can't actually see these things.
No,
we can't see them coming on. We tend to just measure them. And
I know a couple of physicists in our field, and one of them is very careful and basically scolds some of my colleagues about saying ESP. You can say ESP is like quantum entanglement, but you can't say it is quantum entanglement, because we don't know the mechanism that our thoughts get imprinted on something so small and then can be received by someone and scaled back up.
Sure.
Because that's a physics problem, a neuroscience problem, and a psychology problem. It's three problems.
It is. It really is. And when you say that quantum entanglement, again, for our audience, we're talking about two things happening simultaneously with distance not mattering, but existing in two different places at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, right? And
there's, of course, those objects have to be, and it's really, we're talking about electrons or other particles, and they have to be entangled. In other words, they have to be connected in some way. We're entangled to a lot of people. That's the telepathy thing makes sense from a metaphor perspective, because people who are more emotionally connected have more psychic experiences with each other. That's a form of entanglement, but that's not quantum entanglement. That's a gross level, macro level entanglement. At the quantum level, there's been research that's they've shown that, first of all, quantum entanglement does work. It's real. And the question is, can you transfer information at that level? And then how do you detect that and work through it? So that's a physics issue right now.
Sure. And that is fascinating. And I love that, science eventually is catching up with the phenomena that we've experienced all along. And we can only go by like kind of what they say, right? But I don't think they've been able to explain everything. So there's still some mystery out there in the universe.
And there's a lot about the brain. We still don't know what consciousness is. We still don't have, there's no agreed upon definition of that.
Nope. I mean, they have said that they have measured that after someone passes away, consciousness still lives in the body. That they measured.
We might know that activity still lives in the body, but that doesn't mean that consciousness is still in the body. That's
very true.
Right.
That's very true. But they're in the brain, and it lives on for a little while. So, but we don't.
There are assumptions we make. I remember years and years and years ago, I was curious about how psychologists and others were determining what part of the brain was the emotional center for anger and love and all that stuff. And I was very disappointed to find out that they were using method actors as their subjects, because, let's face it, if you brought the three of us into a laboratory and the researcher said, get angry, they would have to do something to make us feel angry, which honestly would be unethical. So they couldn't do that. Or, bring somebody in who is experiencing love or sadness or whatever else. Emotion. How do you determine the location of the brain where the emotion sits if that person's not experiencing that emotion for real? They're only experiencing the memory of that emotion, which is what method actors do.
Right. Wow. I never knew that. That's not nice.
We have to be running around with scan caps all day.
Yes.
Sure. Feel those emotions truly and genuinely.
Right.
I think people sometimes pick up on some of this sort of psychic or psychokinetic energy when they're like maybe messing with their phone and they're angry. And I know, my phone will move slow, and Kristen can break phones, and this stuff is a common experience, as well as maybe the most common experience is that ESP of knowing who's calling you or texting you at a certain time.
Yes.
Well, and actually, the joke is, of course, that would have to be not counting caller ID. So
Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, as soon as you feel the phone go off, and you're like, oh, I know that's my daughter. Or,
yeah. Well, in the olden days, I can say that now.
Right.
In the olden days, you'd have a wired phone to the wall. There's no caller ID, and then you knew who was going to calling, or you actually knew that the call was coming through in a moment, and you knew who it was. I mean, those are better experiences in many respects.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah,
I
for
agree.
sure.
Technology.
It seemed like there was more haunted phantom phone calls back then too, which kind of surprises me. And I know it was written about. There were books about this stuff, and I do know a couple of people. We do, like our friend Nathaniel is one.
Yep, Anne-Marie Young is one as well.
Who received phone calls, over like a landline from the deceased.
They're still happening now. I mean, my colleague Cal Cooper took up the research that Scott Rogo had originally done with Raymond Bayless on telephone calls from the dead. And his book is, it's called Telephone Calls from the Dead. It's out of print right now, but he's working to get it back in print, I think this fall. And so he's continued with that research. And I know I've talked to people and even had folks contact me who got a voicemail or even a video. We had one person who got a video clip that was time-stamped after the person had died.
Oh, my goodness.
So it was like kind of a part of a FaceTime call. So sometimes you do have those kinds of things.
Oh, that's interesting, right?
Yes.
How the full-bodied apparition goes into a two-dimensional level and on a flat screen, and you're looking at it.
Oh, it's a manipulation of the information, really, is what it is, of the signal.
Sure, it's
Fascinating.
The vibrations and the frequencies and everything all put together, and it's I don't know.
On that note, another common thing, a phenomena that people experience, we've heard Rupert Sheldrake talk on this one a lot, is the idea of being stared at.
Right.
People understand, they feel, and this is something that happens in haunted locations. They feel somebody staring at them. They just feel that presence, that it's almost like their eyes are upon them. I think Rupert was saying something like the British Secret Service, and I forget their acronym. I can't remember it off the top of my head. Actually trains people
MI6
to, I'm not sure, to stab people in the back and not look at them. So if they're sneaking up on somebody and they're going to stab them, they tell them not to look at that person that they're going to stab.
Yeah, I think the sense of being stared at is been, like I said, in 1917, there was a published research on that. And there's an Army field, or there used to be an Army field manual. My late colleague, Martin Caden, who was a science and science fiction writer and had been in Army intelligence, showed me a copy of one of the Army field manuals from the 70s, where it basically said that this is instructions for snipers: do not stare at your target directly for more than a minute, and even preferably less, because by mental telepathy, they will know they're being targeted.
That's amazing.
Right.
It really is.
So there's the phenomena right in real time happening.
Right.
So
we've all experienced it.
You've mentioned Martin Caden. He was a good friend of yours. I believe you had a.
Oh yes. We were going to get into that. Some of the cases, and one of the books that we have is this one here. It's called a Paranormal Casebook.
Then we're back out in print, hopefully by the end of the summer. It's out
okay. Currently out of print.
It's been out of print for a few years. I'm getting it back in.
Oh, okay. All right. But I think the first story you told in there that Kristen, you're referencing is about Martin Caden, and we thought that was a fascinating story, and we're hoping you could tell it.
Sure. So just to give a little context, I mentioned he was a science and science fiction writer. He was, if people look him up, he was a real amazing guy. He wrote over 200 books, and about half of them were aviation and space science books. He was also a consultant to NASA. In fact, I visited him more than a few times in Florida, and he would get calls from the Cape, and he would be on the phone for a few minutes saying, yeah, no, that's not correct. Here's what actually happened. He was the living memory of the history of NASA at that point. Wow. They would call him before they'd look at anything.
Wow.
But he also could do psychokinesis. I worked with him for a few years on PK, different PK work. So he's in my book, Mind Over Matter, actually quite a bit in that book. And we got to know each other pretty well. I mean, I didn't see him as much as I would have liked. Talked to him all the time. Before he died, he kept on kidding me and saying, Auerbach, I'm going to come back. I'm going to haunt you. So I actually was kind of looking forward to that. So when I got word from his wife that he passed away, because he had terminal cancer for about a year and a half longer than the Mayo Clinic said he'd live. But he did actually, because he was mad at them for telling him how long he should live. So his wife called me, and I had promised to take 3 shots of rum when he died. So I did my 3 shots, and with expectation, especially in this field, you kind of think, okay, now I'm going to have an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And nothing happened. And nothing happened for a week, and nothing happened for 9 days. And then on the 10th day or so, I was driving to the Oakland airport very early in the morning, take an early flight up to Oregon for work. And my car, which was only a little over 2 months old, was still smelled new, filled up with the smell of very stinky cigar smoke, and nobody smoked in my car.
Oh,
and
my
it was definitely the brand of cigar that Marty smoked. And I felt like there was a presence next to me. And I said my piece, I said goodbye, and then it went away. And I was on the road driving that whole time. So I get up to Oregon, pick up a phone at the airport. Before I even go into Portland, at the airport, I called a buddy of Marty's who I'd gotten to know, another pilot by the name of Bob Button, who was in New Jersey. And I'd met Bob a whole bunch of times in Florida. And as Bob's picking up, he says, "Lloyd, I can't believe you're calling. You must be psychic." So, of course, I said, "Of course I am, Bob." Why do you say that this time? Apparently, he had been flying his Cessna in New Jersey. And so my experience happened at 7 a.m. Pacific time. At 7:10 Pacific time, 10:10 Eastern time, his cockpit filled up with the smell of cigar smoke, and he felt the presence of Martin Caden.
Oh, my goodness.
And then he told me, he said he had just gotten off the phone with a guy named John Tracy in Florida, who was another pilot friend of Marty's. And he had been flying, and his cockpit at 10:20 had done the same thing. Wow. So Bob afterwards checked with other people, and was something like 25 of us on either side of my experience had either in a car went alone, never with somebody else, with a car went alone, or in a plane went alone in the cockpit, had the exact same experience.
Wow.
So Marty was saying goodbye.
That's fascinating.
That's wonderful, though. But...
And those experiences tend to happen relatively close to the actual passing of the person.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, a week and a half was actually a long time. And I mentioned that to Bob and said, well, how come it took him so long? And he said, well, he had friends all over the world. We were obviously lower on the list.
Interesting concept.
Yes.
And that is a very good book. I look forward to that coming back out in print. I think
and the one you were talking about was Mind Over Matter as well.
Correct. Which unfortunately I was just told by Llewellyn about 2 weeks ago that it's now out of print.
Oh,
so
goodness.
That one I'll get that one back in print also. I'm hoping to get both of those back in print by the end of the summer, if not before that.
I should seek it out because there are a lot of good cases in here.
Absolutely.
And like another kind of famous case a lot of people have heard of is the USS Hornet. And you talk about that in that book as well.
Yeah. And I was involved with the Hornet since shortly after they opened as a museum. There was a psychic who was working with the foundation at the time because one of the people in the foundation was was freaking out about what was going on. And she brought me in, and we actually worked out the situation of actually letting the public know about it as a way of bringing more people into the museum.
That's great, and it's known for, I think, apparitions and different things.
Lots and lots of apparitions. Yeah, very active guys.
Well, that's super cool. So we look forward to that.
Absolutely.
The other book there that you mentioned, Mind Over Matter. This is a comprehensive guide to discovering your psychic powers. And we were just talking a bit about being psychic. Do you feel that anybody can be psychic? Yes.
We're all a bit psychic. We tend to lose it from childhood, partly because our culture especially has educated us out of it and told us this stuff is impossible. But people can learn to do things. The thing that I've learned over the years is not everybody can do everything. And not everybody can do the same thing. So there are different applications of psychic ability, whether it's ESP or PK or even seeing ghosts or doing spirit communication. Mm-hmm. And not everyone has the aptitude to do everything. So some people are really good at learning remote viewing, one method or another, but they can't do anything else psychically. Right. Some people are really great at psychometry, but they can't do anything else. And part of this, especially with psychokinesis, there is a psychological element here. It has to do with what you believe and what you believe you personally can do and can accept. Belief factor is the most connected factor in being psychic at all, even doing ESP tests. If you don't believe in ESP, if you think it's hogwash, you're probably going to score possibly even significantly below chance, which is really weird. Like you're guessing wrong on purpose, unconsciously,
Sure.
just to make sure things don't give us evidence. So
Right.
it's I've worked with a number of psychics over the years, and one of the things I'm also working on is getting my late investigation partner, Annette Martin. She was a psychic and medium, a phenomenal one. She wrote a great book, which is out of print, but we are working on, that should also be this summer, called Discovering Your Psychic World. And it's a workbook. And it covers all sorts of psychic abilities. And Annette's kind of intro, and I'm adding a little bit to this, is you're not going to be good at everything. Find the thing you're good at and practice that.
And kind of run with that.
Absolutely.
Everybody is unique. So we
Yeah.
say all the time, everybody is unique. We don't all have the same gifts. Some of us do. Some of us can see. Some of us can't, like you were saying. So, and it's true.
Some of us have aptitude for musical instruments, for some instruments over others. Some of us can sculpt. Some of us can paint. Some of us have no ability whatsoever artistically.
Yeah.
So, it's similar to creative talents is really what it is, that you can exercise those things. Once you figure out what you might be good at, you can definitely learn to do more, to do better.
What's the name of the book again from her?
It's called Discovering Your Psychic World by Annette Martin. It'll be out hopefully in August. And it will not be an ebook, because that's a whole different level for a workbook.
Sure.
It's really tough.
Yeah.
There's another one that I recommend to my students called The Psychic Workbook by Karen Fox.
Okay.
It's got a little bit more, it's got a lot more to it in terms of meditation and things like that than Annette's book is really straightforward.
No relation to the Fox sisters.
I was just going to ask that. No,
I don't think she has any relation to the Fox sisters at all.
That's interesting. And I do think people are kind of born inclined to certain things, and maybe it is simply that belief system. Who we talked about a little bit earlier, he talked about a subconscious connection to things, and from us, attempting to remote view and taking remote viewing classes and such, that seems like there's a filter. You just have to turn everything off to get that information in and just let it go in.
Well, that's the problem. We this is one of the things in basic remote viewing you learn, and it's the same in almost any psychic ESP form of ability, is as soon as we start getting some picture or some information in our heads, human inclination is immediately to categorize and name it.
It's AOL, it's analytical overlay, and I understand that. It drives me nuts.
It's closely related to pareidolia that people experience when they look at clouds.
Well, it's that. But it's also in dream interpretation. You got to be careful. If you're trying to interpret your dreams, it's the same problem. You actually have to look at what that thing is and what it might represent. That it's not necessarily a banana; it's something representing something else. So getting it, as soon as if I was doing remote viewing and I started getting a picture of these steel beams with cross beams, and there's a wide base and it's coming to a much narrower base at the top, a lot of folks would immediately start thinking about the Eiffel Tower as a location, when in fact it just could be a tower for power lines, which has the same or similar lines to it. But as soon as you think Eiffel Tower, your brain fills in the Eiffel Tower, and you're never going to get the rest. Yeah, you're never going to get it.
Yes.
We've both experienced that quite a bit. It's very difficult to just get the data out there as it comes in and not manipulate it in some way.
Right.
That's fascinating.
I'm sorry, I played it with your notes.
You think we have enough paper? All this technology, we don't have enough paper. We don't have enough trees. But let me ask you one of the questions that we ask all our guests, and I find this an interesting statistic. And people that are pursued, whether it's paranormal investigating or parapsychology or really just anything to do in those genres, tended to have some sort of haunted experience in their childhood. Did you have anything happen to you as a child that maybe you just wanted to figure out as an adult?
Nope.
No,
all right, you're an exception.
Great.
Yeah. All right. So I'll qualify that a little bit. I mean, I did have a burst appendix when I was 3, and I was on critical for 3 days. Apparently, I don't remember any of that. I remember being in the hospital after. I remember beforehand. So it's possible I had an experience while I was out, but nothing that impacted me consciously then. But my dad worked for NBC, so I had a TV set in my room when I was 2. And I had unrestricted, we were never restricted to watch anything on TV. I was watching monster movies from when I was like 4 years old, and my brothers freaked out about that stuff, but I had no problem with it. But there were shows that were on, including reruns of the old Topper TV show, which was my first real introduction to human ghosts other than Casper the Friendly Ghost. And people can find episodes of Topper. There's actually a free, on YouTube, you can find the movie with Cary Grant as one of the ghosts, actually. It was a great series. It impressed the hell out of me as a kid. So that was my ghost experience. But then I also watched shows like One Step Beyond, which dramatized actual psychic experiences in kind of a Twilight Zone-ish way. Mm-hmm. And then as I started reading mythology books as a kid and comic books. So comic book superheroes were the big thing for me until Star Trek came on. And even then I kept reading comic books. Star Trek was the first time I probably saw anything about psychic abilities, even in that first, or I should say the second episode, the second pilot that they did. And that really intrigued me because of the comic book psychic powers stuff. And then Dark Shadows was the first time I heard the word parapsychology. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I wonder if there are books on that. And so I'm like 12 years old, and I found books in the library by Rhine and a number of other researchers. And I had been a science geek anyway as a kid. So I just dove right into the science of parapsychology. I love the folklore, but the science was really interesting for me.
Yes, that's awesome.
Totally relate to that. While we both had kind of haunted childhoods ourselves, I was definitely a big fan of horror movies at a young age. And in our area growing up, of course, this is back when we had, 4 channels and Rabbit Ears on TV.
Channel 56 Creature double feature. I had to watch that.
But I was going to say.
There you go. Yeah, we had Creature features. We had Chiller Theater. We had all. When I was a teenager, there were so many of them on Friday and Saturday nights. I would never go to sleep before 3 a.m. on a like Friday night, and then Saturday night, same thing.
Yeah,
awesome.
They're great. I loved horror movies. It never really scared me, but I liked the idea. Some of them did a little bit when I was a little kid. I'd actually take a drive-in and some kind of rated R horror movie and want to crawl under the.
Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad.
But most of the ones I didn't watch the slasher films. I wasn't a big fan of slasher or gore films, but they were rerunning the old Universal horror, monster movies and the Hammer movies and all that.
Sure,
stuff.
The Hammer movies are great.
That was all good stuff.
Yeah, we love Christopher Lee.
So cool. But when you say PK, we're talking about psychokinesis,
right?
Which is just almost kind of a umbrella term for a lot of these abilities, right? Telepathy.
It is, and most people know the term telekinesis for people who do this, and then of course the object moves. Mm-hmm. And if you were looking at pop culture images, the thing that's really amazing and amusing both is that when you see people doing PK or even moving an object, that's telekinesis is a form of psychokinesis, but we just use PK to cover it all. That includes psychic healing. It includes actually EVP is considered a PK effect as well. Even if it's a dead guy, it's still PK. It's still mind over matter. We look at spoon bending, the metal bending, effect on energy and on computer systems. We do a lot of research with random number generators that are essentially within systems. So all of that is an effect of the mind on everything, but also even looking at one's own body and how people have done self-healing and have had total remissions of cancer because of their mindset, not because of something else that's going on. That's all PK. So it really, even the placebo effect falls under psychokinesis because that is a mind-body thing.
Mind over matter, exactly.
It is mind over matter. So with telekinesis, the general image is the person has to concentrate. We always hear people saying, so concentrate on moving it. And then all of a sudden people get really red in the face and they get the throbbing vein in their head. Mm-hmm. That's what you see on TV because it's visual or movies. That's not what somebody who's doing PK doesn't look like that at all.
No.
They look completely blank. They're like a Vulcan. It's like Mr. Spock doing PK.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what do you think it is that they're doing or thinking or not thinking?
Right.
It's an acceptance. I mean, I've done it myself. A colleague of mine actually did her doctoral dissertation and published a book called The PK Zone on the phenomenology or the experience of doing PK. She actually did extensive interviews with people who had a lot of PK experiences or people like Marty Caden, who actually was able to do it. And one of the things that's interesting is you learn to trust the process. You trust that it's really going to happen. So it's beyond belief. I mean, it's not even it's like, you're not going to get surprised when it does move. That's important because psychologically, we are all trained to be inhibited when something moves on its own. The immediate thing is, oh, that didn't happen. Or you come up with some other explanation.
Right.
Sometimes the other explanation is right. Sometimes it is a normal explanation. So you have to consider that too. But then there's also this issue of kind of like imagining or visualizing or thinking of the end result, not moving it, but where it needs to be at the end. That's what I would need to visualize. And then you have to sometimes get out of your own way. I have done personally run a couple dozen spoon bending parties over the years. And the guy who came up with that did a number for us at our graduate program back in the late 70s, early 80s. He was an aerospace engineer who took the psychology of psychokinesis, which was dictated, or I should say, summarized by a researcher named Kenneth Batchelor in the UK in the 1970s. And he took this idea of getting people past their inhibitions of seeing it and even owning up to it, because that's the other problem is, I've done these workshops on PK and people may see things moving, somebody else is moving it. That's great. That actually makes it easier for them to do it. But then when they do it, they freak out. It's like, I didn't do that. Did I do that? I didn't do that. So then they can't do it for the rest of the time.
It is scary because
to have that power.
We're told it's scary. So we got to get out of our own way. And the thing about the spoon bending parties is that, yes, some of the stuff is done without people realizing they're putting pressure and strength on it. But there's an awful lot of things that are happening at these where there's just not any possible way that someone's strength could have worked with the metal that's there and actually done what has been done to the metal. And sometimes we've seen things that flop over on their own. There have been analyses of some of those spoons. There has been a different structure for when you physically break it or bend it with your hands versus something else going on. So there is a difference in structure at that point. But the whole thing about we call them PK parties or spoon bending parties because you want to get people laughing and giggling, especially when they're yelling at their spoons to bend. Because that's stupid. It's really stupid. It feels very goofy to do that, which is good. It gets you out of your way.
Right. It's a good thing to sit there and laugh.
A sort of energy in that too.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I did one actually where one of my students brought a friend of his who was a stand-up comic, and she helped a lot. She was cracking jokes the whole time. And then at the end, as we're kind of winding down, she then said, "So has anybody done unbend?" And so we started doing that. And she was literally straightening out these spirally bound cheap spoons that under normal circumstances, when you try to bend them, they snap anyway. And she was straightening them out, which was to me even more interesting than the bending part.
Right. Right. Yeah. I haven't heard of that. That's pretty good. Wow. But Uri Geller made that pretty famous in the 70s. And
yeah. I think if Uri hadn't come along, we wouldn't be doing spoon bending at all.
Sure. Yes. It was a pretty amazing guy. Speaking of PK, I know you've been on this gentleman's show, Jeffrey Mishlove.
We love him.
This was one of my favorite.
He was one of my instructors at JFK back in.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, he seems like a great guy, and I really love what he's done for the field and created a platform that he did. And I always recommend people check that out, that kind of aspect of it, because a lot of our audience are like paranormal investigators and they're just used to the standard stuff that's on TV, and they don't understand there are like people trying to, work on the hows and whys of this happening and have been since the 1800s or maybe possibly.
Yeah, and frankly, the paranormal TV shows don't resemble what we do in reality.
They honestly don't.
Yeah, they're production. They're entertainment is what they are.
Exactly. They're scripted and
they're not scripted, but they are directed. There's no if there was a physical script, then the Writers Guild would get involved. That's the reason we even have reality TV, was because of a Writers Guild strike back in 1988.
Oh, that's wicked interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, there was a big strike, and all the networks had no programming. They had no scripts, so they looked for alternative programming. They came up, and reality TV made the most sense. Not paranormal reality shows at that point, but that's where we ended up with so much of these different competition shows, the different reality shows. Mm-hmm. They're not scripted because they can't be. But the director or producer who's on set or with you can tell you to say, can you say it differently? Can you say it this way?
50 times later.
Can you come walking in a little slower?
Yeah.
And can you look surprised? Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you for letting us know that. That's something we learned. We never knew that.
Yeah. Besides growing up I grew up in the TV world, and I've done a lot of these shows, and I've actually gotten cut out of shows because I refused to say what the director wanted me to say.
Oh, I bet. That would be me. That's what I told him. I'm like, there's no way I could do that.
Yeah.
No, we're in the middle of doing a documentary of our own. So I'm like, we are the directors.
So. To get that together. But, you think about those kind of things, you know what I mean? It's like, well, you don't want to look bad, but obviously when you're gathering data in some way, that would have to be unscripted and live, of course. Right.
Yeah. And the reality is that you can be at a location. Some locations, for example, for the TV shows, you're going to be there for a lot longer than the 22 minutes of a half-hour show.
Oh, absolutely. They have to edit it.
They have to edit it down. And that's the other problem here is because I've done segments over the years for other shows where it wasn't going to be a long segment anyway, but they were going to edit down the 2-hour interview they did with me, which then gets to be about 30 seconds to a minute and a half on the show.
Oh my goodness.
I have no control over what part of that they take. If I used to do segments for the TV show Sightings back in the 90s, and they were pretty good about portraying things accurately, but there were times that they showed me reacting to something, and they didn't show the follow-up to that, which was me being disappointed because I found the reason why that thing was happening. That had nothing to do with the paranormal.
Oh my goodness.
Cuts, that's unless you're in the edit room, there is no way that show is going to be what you want it to be, or it's not going to resemble even the reality of what's going on.
Sure, it's going to be somebody else's vision.
Yeah,
and it makes sense, in the real world. Things work and projects work in the corporate world. There's usually somebody in charge of something above you, and they're going to take whatever work you've done and edit it and use it for something else. And that I can understand that, and it is at the end of the day, like you said, entertainment. But one of the reasons why we love you, and I think the paranormal community loves you, is that you are a parapsychologist that actually investigates and does these things, has been to site and does them, and not everything's in a laboratory for you, correct?
Right. And there are actually a number of my colleagues who have done investigations. They mainly focus on laboratory work because that's their job, their paying job, because nobody gets paid for field. You don't make money doing field investigations unless you're doing them for TV, and you don't. There's not like a grant for field work. That's the biggest problem. There are no grants or funding for field work. And because of that, some people who are involved in parapsychology may have a separate job. I have a regular day job. I have to have one to support everything else I do. Or they may be working for a research organization, and that's their day job, more or less. But part of what they do, because it's related to it, is doing field investigation, field work as well. So there have been people like Bill Roll and a number of others in the field who focus on field work, although they're still doing laboratory work.
Yeah, understood. But that you actually get your hands dirty out there,
right.
And it's documented like in your body of work. It is a nice thing, and it's cool because I think people can relate to it better.
And I originally intended to be a laboratory researcher, but I learned that I didn't like statistics. So
a lot of it is statistics.
I didn't like the math. Yeah, that was pretty much it. Yeah.
No, I don't like math either. I mean, I have a big thing with that. Chris knows that.
Another aspect of your work too is your work with mediums and mediumship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is, I think, wonderful. We both do. Do you want to talk on that a little bit? And
sure.
The role of a medium, perhaps in a paranormal team, is an important one.
Well, first of all, the thing to remember is that all the gadgets that people have, I don't care what the manufacturer slaps on the label or tells you they do not detect ghosts, period. We don't know what we're trying to detect. I mean, maybe ghosts are affecting it, but we do not know how those could possibly do that because we don't have an idea of what we should be detecting here. However, human beings are built to detect ghosts, to have these experiences. In fact, if you have an empty building and no witnesses ever, just because it looks spooky, maybe there's a ghost there, maybe not, but how would you know? So from a parapsychological perspective, we're starting with a human experience, hopefully many human experiences. And from that, we can determine what we need to investigate. I just don't go to spooky buildings because there's no point. There's no one to talk to. in that circumstance. We have to have someone and to talk to, and hopefully someone recent, because places are not haunted forever. That's another thing that's really important to know, is that the haunting or the apparitions move on, the hauntings fade away. They're not haunted forever. So you need relatively current witnesses to have had experiences. So if you've got some witnesses in the household, that's great. But if they're freaked out, it's hard to get information from them. And then there are people like good psychics and mediums who have been vetted, tested in some way, shape, or form, even if it's in the field, who, as long as their personality is such that you can work with them, and I'll get to that in a minute,
Okay.
They become your main sensor device. And then the electronic equipment backs their experience up. So the medium or psychic says there's something here in the corner, and you get a high EMF, and you can eliminate normal sources of EMF. Then you have a correlation, a connection. You can do that with the witnesses too, but they're usually less likely to want to participate. Mm-hmm. And most witnesses don't want to be the communicators. When the ghost is trying to talk, for example, they don't want to do that. So working with mediums has been a big piece of it. And I go back to, for myself, when I was working at the American Society for Psychical Research, my first job. You know, we did have a couple psychics who were involved in some of the courses at JFK when I was a student. But when I started working at the ASPR, they were doing research with a guy named Alex Tanis, who was a psychic and medium who could do out-of-body work. And that was the main focus of Dr. Carlos Osis's research. But Osis, with his assistant, Donna McCormick, with Alex, would go out and do investigations as well. So he's doing laboratory and field work. He'd done a lot of field work over the years. And I spent a lot of time with Alex. I was in the education department, and part of my job was actually also to take Alex to some lectures, because he was often coming down from Maine every other week, where he would stay at the ASPR, and he would at some point every time he was down, FBI, New York Police Department, Boston PD, some police department, law enforcement agency was there to consult with him.
Oh, wow.
So we were always told never to talk about it. This is many years later. Alex would never talk about it because he wasn't a big ego guy. And then I talked to Alex and Dr. Osis about investigating and why the two of them worked together so well. And it was because Dr. Osis relied on Alex to, number one, support the stories of the witnesses or get better information to explain what the witnesses were experiencing, because Alex could sometimes find the things that were not paranormal. And how they worked together was kind of a model for me. But there were others who had done that many years before. Holzer had worked with psychics. Other researchers back in the early part of the 20th century had worked with psychics and mediums. And I was very fortunate when I came back out to California to work with people on the faculty at JFK we had a couple of people who were psychics. One was a psychic and psychologist, and I worked with her quite a bit on cases. And there were others as well that I was able to work with. And then I had people presenting themselves to me, and some of them were really good psychics. Psychically, they could do stuff. Their personality was not workable. So I will tell you, one of the things I teach my students is it's not just about how good a psychic they are. It's, do they make it about themselves? Right. And I've taken some psychics to test them in a case, and all of a sudden, nobody's paying attention to them because we're working in other areas. And all of a sudden, they're like, ah! And everybody turns around and focuses on the psychic, and it's like it's diva.
Yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't work for us. So we don't work with them for that. And I tell them, I said, you're a great psychic. You just should not be working in a ghost investigation.
Oh yeah. I can totally relate to this. Having been like in the world of music before and in bands and stuff.
Yeah.
And, we used to call it LSD, lead singer disease.
So it's a performer thing. I mean, many psychics are performers.
It didn't always have to be the singer, but
yeah,
there was a tendency there. Yeah.
That you're right. It's performance, and look at me, and
look at me.
I'm not moving any gear.
And there are also people that I refuse to work with psychics who don't have a sense of humor.
So,
that's good.
Annette Martin, who I worked with for many years, and I mean, she had a great sense of humor, and I've always found, since the very beginning of my work, that a little bit of lightheartedness and a little bit of humor helps quite a bit. Peter Venkman from Ghostbusters, Bill Murray's character.
Yeah.
You need a little bit of that.
Yes, I have to laugh because now that you said that, I just noticed you have the Stay Puft Man in the back of you on your bookcase. I want one for ours.
I do.
You do. I just realized that.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah, and actually, I have a proton pack on my closet door. So
It's excellent.
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
You're doing a lecture, I think, soon on choosing psychics.
yeah, so Wednesday night I'm doing a lecture on it's a meetup that's run by the Bay Area Ghost Hunters, and it's how to assess a psychic, basically. It's something I've taught a course on that for the Rhine Education Center. I've lectured on a number of times because of my background in magic and mentalism. I have kind of an insider view of psychic fraud. And I've also, over the years, I've worked with some true skeptics. I try to avoid what we call pseudo skeptics, or the ones who like to wear the big capital S on their chest, like Superman. It's skeptic. I'm a skeptic.
Like that.
It doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah, they're not really skeptics; they're disbelievers. And but I've had some folks who have worked with, and I've been involved in psychic entertainment since around 1989, 1990, which involves a lot of the psychic pseudo side, kind of like faking stuff for entertainment purposes.
Sure.
And there's the thing I was going to be talking about is what makes a good psychic or medium, for that matter. I mean, I've worked with mediums now for the Forever Family Foundation for a number of years as well. Mm-hmm. And I'll be talking about, some of the techniques that people will use as fraudulent psychics. But what's really interesting to me, and what I've learned, even some of the skeptics have learned over the years, is that a lot of these folks, for example, at a psychic fair,
mm-hmm.
they may not be psychic, but they may believe that they're psychic. So there's a sincerity that sometimes comes through. And what's happened is they are good observers of human beings. They just are like those kind of people that could maybe not quite as good as Sherlock Holmes, but they're really good at nonverbal communication and observation and listening and all of that and reflecting back. And people along the way, someone told them they were psychic and they should start doing that.
Mm.
So
we understand that
believable,
one.
yeah.
So it's not that all the people who are not psychic are phonies or frauds, And then there are also people who are really psychic who are incredibly unethical, and all they want is a buck from you.
Sure.
And have probably $1,000 or more.
Right. Some psychics do charge a lot of money for those readings.
And sometimes
it's to choose somebody who is legit and is not taking advantage of you. And that's why I thought that was a great lecture series, because I've known people that have spent all kinds of money.
I'll be teaching the full 4-week class this fall sometime for the Rhine as well.
That's great. Where will people be able to find that?
The class?
Yeah.
Well, we'll go on about the classes because I actually want to show the page.
Okay.
But the Wednesday night, is that on your Facebook or?
It's on my Facebook page, my Loyd Auerbach author page. So Loyd.Auerbach.author. I know that we have 60 people registered so far. I think that a woman who's hosting wanted to cut it off, but I'm going to see if I can push it bigger than that. But that is on my Facebook and also on my Twitter feed. So it's facebook.com/Loyd.Auerbach.author, and you'll find it there. You can also find it on my regular Facebook page, just Loyd.Auerbach. It's just that know that if you try to friend me, I will not respond. I have 4,995 friends, and you're only allowed to have 5,000.
Right, you have 5 more left. That's it.
Right.
And I'm not doing that. I'm only doing it. I have people drop off, but these days it's only for real exceptions, or my colleagues who haven't friended me yet, or my friends, actual people I know for real, actually really know. But people can follow my author page easily.
Oh,
and
that's great.
That's Wednesday night. It's Wednesday night at 7 Pacific. So it's going to be a late night one for East Coast people. And then that is the page for the Education Center.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is the Rhine Education Center that I'm showing. And for those of us that are going to be just listening to this in a podcast, I want to give you the web address is Rhine edu.org, and it's spelled RHINEEDU.org.
Right. Or they can go to the Rhine Center's, the main page of the Rhine Research Center, which is just simply rhine.org, and click on the education link that's there.
Now, from within here, there's all sort of certification programs going on.
Correct.
Higher learning. some very interesting topics here: field investigations, apparitions, hauntings, and poltergeists, which you're teaching yourself.
Correct. Yeah.
Things like investigating reincarnation and near-death experiences, an 8-week course. This is fascinating.
Yeah, our courses are online. We've had people from all over the world take them. About anywhere from 50% to 2/3 take it for a grade towards a certificate, because we have these certificate programs. The rest, honestly, people are just taking the courses for fun. And what that basically means is they don't do the quizzes, and they may not even do the discussion forums every week, which is less grading for me. That's much better for me, less time. But it's something people can take as kind of a semi-academic thing. You don't need any background for most of the classes. We do have a couple of advanced classes where you have to take the first part initially.
Okay.
So the other one I'm teaching is this paranthropology class, which is actually a combination of parapsychology and anthropology.
I would love to take that class. I love anthropology. Yes.
It's my undergraduate background was in cultural anthropology with a focus on the anthropology of the supernatural. So this is a kind of a fun seminar topic that I teach from time to time. And, we have other people. John Kruth is the executive director of the Rhine Research Center and our main research director. And his classes are always good. And we have now some other people who are teaching as well.
Awesome. I'm writing the names down. If you wonder what I've been doing, I've been writing.
That's fantastic. I like that. Cultural beginnings of Psi. And yeah, is that something you can talk on a little bit?
Sure. One of first I have to go back. Let me go back a little bit, because when I was in college, I actually went to Northwestern as an astronomy major. I had chosen Northwestern over a lot of other schools. Part of it was because the head of the astronomy department was J. Allen Hynek, the UFO guy. Yeah. So I went to Northwestern. Hynek was incredibly knowledgeable about parapsychology. I'd met him when I visited campus when I was a junior in high school. And I knew he knew some parapsychologists. So I thought that would be a great place for me. And there was no parapsychology undergrad degree anywhere anyway. And then towards that first year, the math kind of killed me. So I dropped out of astronomy and switched over to anthropology after talking to a couple of folks who were taking some of the anthro classes and taking an introduction to anthropology. And then I got assigned to a professor as my kind of advisor. And when I walked into his office, it was clear the universe sent me a real strong message, because on his shelf was the Journal of Parapsychology, along with anthropology journals. So we talked about that. It's like that was the right place for me to be. There were several professors who were teaching about witchcraft and sorcery beliefs around the world, about magical beliefs around the world. And in the anthropological literature, when you start reading it about some of the things that are reported, even though they're not necessarily confirmed, it's psychic beliefs. It's belief, and its variations of ESP and PK and things like that are absolutely part and parcel of the anthropological literature, if you're reading it from that perspective, from a parapsychological perspective. There's even a free journal called Paranthropology, which folks can find on the Internet Archive and on Facebook. An anthropologist named Jack Hunter started that a number of years ago, and he's got some great books, both written by him and written by other folks, just collections of articles. In fact, this is, I just had it down from my shelf because I'm just adding it to my class. This is one of his books.
Oh, that looks
it's called
great.
Spirits, Gods and Magic.
Yeah, and it's an introduction to anthropology of the supernatural. So if you want to read, and it's not a long book, it's a really good book. So Hunter is a really good person to start with there. It's a fascinating topic. And I got really fascinated early on with the Australian Aborigines.
Oh,
and
yes.
there's a rich tapestry of psychic effects within their belief system. And I was fortunate to be able to go with a Japanese TV crew and a Japanese medium in '94 down to the outback, actually to Northern Australia, the Northern Territory, and work with an Aboriginal artist and in a couple of experiments with Mrs. Gibo, the Japanese medium. It was really a cool experience. And the fun thing for me, probably the most fun thing, beside the fact that Gibo, the medium, was doing really good remote viewing of the Aboriginal artist's paintings. So he was even painting one on one side of a rock monolith from where she was when he looked at her result compared to his painting, which was from any Western perspective, pretty damn amazing. He didn't react much. He just said, "Oh, it's pretty good." And if anybody's watched Japanese TV, you know that the Japanese television doesn't like that. They want like big reactions.
Yes.
So the director like prods me, ask him something else. And I said, so Thompson, compared to people in Oenpelli, that's the settlement in the Northern Territory, in Arnhem Land, compared to your friends, your family, to people in the community, how did she do? And he starts laughing. And he says, "Oh, we got 3-year-olds who can do better than that."
Oh my God.
So that was the reaction they wanted, although perhaps not the exact reaction that they wanted. Mrs. Gibo was not ego-centered, so she took that. She laughed too. So
yeah, that's cute. Though.
I imagine you see a lot of patterns between those cultures that are the same when you go back to ancient culture.
You do see the language or description of things is different. How people interpret things can be different. We see that in Western culture. I mean, just between people who are in certain fundamentalist religions or have that kind of belief system compared to average people, it's of the devil, or it's just, that's just ESP. It's just really depends on, a lot of times it is the religious belief. So the anthropology of the supernatural really is the anthropology of religion more than, because magic and witchcraft and sorcery beliefs, all of that falls under religious belief more than anything else.
Sure. At the time in the cultures. And you mentioned belief being a key factor in trying to achieve something like psychokinesis or telekinesis.
Intention.
And with ESP also. Belief is the major factor here with any psychic performance. So I would never expect someone who is a disbeliever, no matter how many times they tried, because they're coming at this with even an unconscious piece, which says, no, if you do this, you're saying that it really exists. You don't want to do this.
That's interesting to note. So if you look at our modern culture, you see people seeing Slender Man, a completely fictitious character.
That was made up. Yeah.
It was made up, but they believe in them. Or, maybe teenagers do, and there start to be sightings, and it becomes part of the culture.
It's like a manifestation.
It is.
Yeah, maybe it's a manifestation, or maybe it's just simply you were mentioning pareidolia early on. It's just a matter of they have an experience and they're not clear on what that experience is, so their brain connects it to the Slender Man phenomenon.
Sure.
Do you think some of those belief systems, though, can actually create a manifestation, maybe on a quantum level?
So there's something called a thought form in a lot of traditions. In the Tibetan tradition, they're called tulpas.
Yes, the tulpas, yeah.
And the idea is that intense belief of individuals can cause something to manifest as it's called a thought form because it's not in physical reality, but it hits your brain. And so you perceive it because it's a bit of telepathic projection, you might say. It's information. Kind of like in psychometry, you hold the object and get a picture in your head.
Sure.
So that is one piece of it. One piece of it. The other is, excuse me, I got something caught in my throat.
That's okay.
No worries.
That if you, the idea of a tulpa is at some point with enough belief and focus on that thing, it gains sentience, self-awareness, self-directed. It's not about picking up an image. It's about the image itself actually being like a holographic entity.
There it becomes almost like consciousness, and like egregore is another term, I think, for these.
Yes. Yeah,
and there's no really good evidence for that except in the folklore and in the anthropological literature. There's certain from culture to culture you find that, but and even Hynek, one of the things I talked to him about, he did not think that all UFOs were nuts and bolts hardware. He thought, like Carl Jung, thought that at least some of the things that were being seen were actually thought projections, were psychic projections, which is one of the reasons he was interested in parapsychology. So we're not sure about that. I will tell you, I had an experience back in the 80s on a local talk show where they were doing a show on the 80s were popular for channeling rather than mediumship. The channelers would go into trance and they'd like have an alien speak through them, or very often if they had any Irish background at all in their family, there was a 16th or 17th century Irish man or Irish woman coming through.
Okay.
And there would be all these different entities. And I did this one show where it was kind of a panel of channels. There were a whole bunch of like 4 channelers there, and they all went into trance at the same time, which was really amusing. I was actually brought in to question what channeling was as kind of the skeptic, not really a skeptic, but, and then there was an author of a book called Channeling, a guy's named John Klima, one of the leading researchers, good friend of mine, leading researcher in that area. So they're all going into trance, and seated next to me was a woman who was going to be channeling. And the three on my side, and then John was at the other end, were very vocal, like boisterous, right? The one next to me barely peep unless she was directly asked. So during commercial break, I said, because she was supposedly channeling Athena.
Oh,
okay.
So I said to Athena, because she's in trance, right? Athena, are you the Greek goddess Athena? And how come you're not get more camera time here?
Right.
Right.
And there was like a smile, and what she said was, there never was an entity, a Greek goddess named Athena. I am a thought form of the belief of the ancient Greeks in the spirit of wisdom. And my wisdom tells me that I don't need to be that boisterous.
Wow. Well, that's a fantastic.
So I thought,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, okay, this is the channeler I like.
Yeah. That reminds me of something we talk about on the show quite a bit, about the ability of spirit to maybe play roles.
Yeah.
Step into different roles. And like the entity that you're talking to that identifies itself as this demonic entity maybe really isn't a demonic enemy.
I wrote a book called Reincarnation, Channeling, and Possession, and the book is available. It is a Kindle or Nook book. It is only an ebook, but it is available. It was went out of print, and I brought it back in, and it still sells. And the question of identity is one that I always wondered about.
Yes.
How do you know that think that being coming through from the Pleiades or that demon is not Fred Smith, who was a vacuum cleaner salesman in the 40s.
Exactly.
And nobody's going to listen to him if he comes through as Fred Smith. So I am Archon of the Pleiades.
Right. Sounds better than I've got a Hoover for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Have I got a vacuum cleaner for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. No,
well, that's fascinating. So that is something we think, is a lot of common hauntings, in the folklore and urban folklore, like throughout the country, the world.
Yeah.
There's, the lady in white, and there's always a haunted child, and it's either
the little girl
boy
or a little girl.
Yeah, I know. There's some common.
A lot.
The hitchhiker.
The hitchhiker and the ghostly hitchhiker. Interestingly enough, we've had a story here in the Bay Area as well. But a colleague of mine, Kerry Gaynor, down in L.A., did some research years ago at UCLA's history library, and he found accounts of vanishing hitchhikers or hitchhiking ghosts back to Roman times.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So our joke is she gets around a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that more.
Oh, we have a pretty famous one out this way. We're in New England.
Rehoboth, Mass.
Rehoboth, Mass. We have a phantom hitchhiker who's gotten
the redheaded hitchhiker.
Quite a bit of notoriety.
So my guess is that's kind of an urban thought form programming engram. It's in us. It's in us to see things that way, to interpret things that way.
I am so glad that you called it that.
That is cool. I like that.
Yes. Because we think
we
the
agree
same
with
way.
you on the roles that they will step into things. Our friend Robert Hauntings, a friend of our show, mentioned that he had the pleasure of meeting and chatting with you, Professor Paranormal, at the Glen Tavern Inn in California years ago. Very knowledgeable and well respected, a wonderful author, and a great website.
Thank you, Robert. That was actually a fun event. I really enjoyed being there.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
You have a book on dreams as well.
Oh, yes.
I do.
You do. The Psychic Dreaming.
Psychic Dreaming, which is in its third edition, which is the one that is on sale that did not go out of print from Llewellyn. It is actually selling. In fact, I just spoke at a major dream summit this past week, a virtual dream summit. And it covers the range of dreams that include psychic information or psychic ability, which include visitation dreams, where you dream of a deceased relative or loved one visiting you in your dream. And, one of I get asked a couple questions right off the bat all the time. One is, how do you know it's a psychic dream? And the easy answer to that is, if it's of the future, the event happens or you experience it. So you know that it's confirming the dream. That's the easy answer. Or it's you're dreaming something and you talk to a friend of yours and you both had the same dream, had a situation with mutual dreaming. Or you dreamt of something that went on somewhere else in the world that happened during the middle of the night, and you turn on the TV in the morning and the event happened 2 hours ago when you were asleep.
Good Lord.
So information confirmation is one of them. But the other way is when you wake up and you had this dream and you wonder, it's like, man, that felt really different. And when I was interviewing people, and I've talked to other people who've done dream work about this, is that the psychic dream, whether it is a visitation dream or it is a dream of an event or friends or something else, feels different. Another phrase you use is realer than real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the question that gets asked about the visitation dream specifically is, how do I know that was really my grandfather who was speaking to me in the dream? And the answer is count the other dreams you might have had with your grandfather and tell me how different this one was. And it, again, oh my God, it's like I was really there. It wasn't just my grandfather. It's like I was having a conversation with him. It was realer than real. And so part of this, of course, is people learning to remember their dreams or write them down for confirmation, things like that. But it's a fascinating topic.
Absolutely.
It certainly is. What do you think is going on with consciousness when we dream?
Well, first of all, all those belief things are down. They're gone. In the dream state. The good thing is that if you had a psychic experience when you're awake, whether it's PK or ESP or whatever else, or saw a ghost, you can immediately dismiss it and come up with a different explanation, right?
Sure.
Because you don't want to admit it. In the dream state, you have a built-in alternative explanation. It was just a dream. So all of those things that block you from having psychic experience are gone in the dream state. And we also know that altered states of consciousness do allow us to be more open to information, especially not so much PK stuff happening there, but we're more open to things. And it just is the perfect, I guess you could say, backboard or drawing pad for you to, or canvas for you to paint a picture to allow this stuff to come through without it actually necessarily being metaphorical. I mean, that's the great thing about psychic dreams is very often they do seem real. It's not like, weird symbols and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, for all intents and purposes, your reality is real because you don't always know that you're dreaming. So when you become aware in a dream that it becomes like a lucid dream or an astral projection, is that awareness that you're dreaming. But aside of that, it really is your reality for all intents and purposes while your body rests, right?
And in lucid dreaming, now that you know you're dreaming, you could actually say to yourself, I think I need to talk to my grandfather. Boom, I'm a medium. And that can actually happen.
Oh, wow.
Because you can kind of like turn on your psychic abilities when you're dreaming, as long as you know that you're dreaming.
So we've had some very interesting dreams since we started doing things like hemisync and binaural beats.
Sure.
Our dreams like got into these sort of like timeline things where we just had this awareness that we were in like a different timeline, which sounds bananas.
It's bananas, and
but
I just went into 3 timelines.
Was so
dream.
Clear that in this knowledge. And I had a dream. I woke up and I said, Kristen, look out the window.
Oh yeah.
If we have a big backyard, we're in so much trouble. What is? All I said was, what does the yard look like?
I'm sleeping
because I had been in this dream and it was just so vivid and so real.
Yeah, I'm sleeping. He's late and waking me up. It's like, what does the backyard look like?
Same floor plan, but different environment, like a different part of the world. And it had such an impact, She's had similar dreams too.
God.
One thing that's real common with dreams is familiarity. And I think that's interesting. Yes. Why places that you've never seen before seem so familiar?
So familiar.
Well, and it may be, that you had a kind of a remote viewing dream. You actually viewed the place multiple times, and then you actually go to the location and it is familiar, or you've had that dream before and you don't even remember you've had that dream before, and it just is very familiar to you.
I like the remote viewing answer. That was really cool.
Well, one of the interesting things about precognitive dreams is that people will often talk about, and this has happened to me multiple times, deja vu, that sense of familiarity, right? Mm-hmm. So you're in a situation and you get this really strong sense of deja vu. And there are actually 48 different possible explanations for a given deja vu. My colleague Vernon Neppy up in Seattle has written the book. He actually did a doctoral dissertation 40 years ago on the subject. And he came up with 40 different psychological, physical, and psychic explanations for deja vu. So one of them is that you're in the situation and it feels incredibly familiar because you had a dream that you didn't remember.
Okay.
And the sense of familiarity comes from either a dream that was of similar content to where you are right now, or it was a precognitive dream of being in that situation. And I had I've had a few times over the years, I've had this interesting situation where a dream comes rushing back to me. Oh yeah, I had a dream about that. And on a couple of occasions, I've known what the people were going to say because of that. And I have freaked them out because I've said what they were going to say at the same time they say it.
So it becomes precognition at this point, but it's not, because you had the dream.
The dream was precognitive. I mean, the dream was precognitive. Yeah.
I love that. It's a great explanation for deja vu.
And, you know, these days, because I'm also a psychic entertainer, my friends just look at me like, yeah, what'd you do? You know, kind of thing.
Well,
how'd you make it say that?
So many dreams in a night. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but, you know, you most likely only remember the one you woke up from. Right. And then you're, you know, it's like you got a fuse lit. You better remember it, write it down, or think about it down, or it's gone.
The key factor is actually writing it down, getting into a habit of writing down your dreams. And actually, before you go to sleep, also saying to yourself, I'm going to remember as many dreams as I possibly can when I wake up. And then the act of writing them down or recording them on a voice recorder kind of creates a loop of support. Mm-hmm. And that kind of intention to do that will increase the dream recall dramatically, actually.
Absolutely. No, we've experienced that. We keep dream journals. And
absolutely.
I absolutely agree with you. It does make a difference. It takes about a week or so to settle into that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we fall out of the habit of it. But when we're doing it and trying to recall our dreams better, that is exactly what we do. Set an intention before bed and train the brain, really, to write it down right away. And it gets
you can actually, as part of your intention, you can actually say, and I'm going to have a dream of asking my boss for a raise next week, or I'm going to have a dream of what's going to happen when I go on this trip. You can actually ask, that's called dream incubation, to actually play that out in the dream. And that may just be a little bit of role playing in the dream also, but that also can possibly activate your precognitive ability.
Well, that's fascinating. You cover all that in your book, Psychic Dreaming. Mm-hmm. That's great. I see it right there on Amazon for those that are looking. Also see ESP Wars, East and West, is another book we didn't talk about. Yeah, and you mentioned Ingo Swann before, and that's what the book's about, actually, the U.S. government's remote viewing program, but also the Russian government's remote viewing program. Right, which isn't talked about a whole lot.
No.
But
it's not.
We started ours to compete with them, right?
Yeah, the main author of the book is Edwin May, who was the program director of Stargate from 85 to 95 when it shut down, but he was also involved with the project from about 1975, physicist background for that. So he was doing remote viewing research with them quite a long time. And then Joe McMoneagle is another author who was the number one viewer for, the Army project. Yes. Then we were fortunate to have, because during the 90s, Joe and Ed got to know some of their counterparts in Russia, after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so we actually had contributions from a couple of the Russians who were actually running the programs, who were training people even to this day. One of the psychics who's been involved as well. And in fact, our foreword is by Nikolai Sham, who was the deputy director of the KGB before the Soviet Union fell. So we have an insider bit. And for those who are interested in politics, because what happened was they had disparate sections they were trying to pull together in a book. And no publisher apparently was interested, because if you started reading it, Ed's a really good scientific academic writer, incredible speaker to the general public otherwise, but he doesn't write well for the general public. And each of the sections, I think Joe's was probably the one that was best written because he'd been a writer already, but the different sections didn't connect. So I was brought in to not only make it all one story, but also to add some sections in the front and back of the piece. And as I was going through the material, we did cut some stuff out from the Russians because it was superfluous to the story. But we did leave in some stuff about the KGB and about some goofy things that Boris Ratnikov, General Ratnikov, who was one of the viewers and also was one of the people running the program, he had some funny KGB stories. Believe it or not, there were funny KGB stories. So there's a really kind of insider from people who were in the KGB and were insiders in Russia and during the Soviet Union years as well, kind of their perspective on being in the KGB. And it's very different, came across very differently than anything I had ever seen before, to the point where I felt like I was reading something from the FBI in the US and not the CIA with crazy agents running around outside the US. So it's politically, it's really interesting. And the whole start of the program, you were right. We started doing our Stargate program because the Russians were claiming success in essentially psychotronic weapons powered by psychic ability and psychotronic generators and all sorts of psychic things. The Russians actually started their program in the 60s because they were worried about us because they got information which was leaked to them that we had been doing. The U.S. Navy with the CIA had been doing telepathy experiments with deep sea submarines and had success, which actually wasn't true. They spend billions of dollars doing their thing. Then they say they have success. Then we start our program. And what Ed and Joe learned from Ratnikov and Alexei Savin and the others is they did not have success with those devices. That was propaganda.
Oh my. Of course it was.
Propaganda machine.
But it was interesting enough, mostly propaganda directed at the Kremlin, because there had already been a parapsychologist who blew the whistle on some of this, and he was in a gulag. So failure was not tolerated. So they basically stretched out their success, even though there was never any real success. Except with remote viewing. They had a lot of success with remote viewing, especially for law enforcement.
It's interesting. It really is. I love the Stargate story.
Yeah.
And the people involved with it. It's just a very fascinating story all around. If you're not familiar with it, I'd recommend people look into it. It seems like a great book to dig into.
Absolutely.
And learn about it.
I've had people who are not interested in psychic phenomena at all, and I've really suggested they read it, and they were politically interested, and they found it really fascinating from that perspective. Why did we start the program? How was that? Why was it ended? All that stuff was politics.
Sure. And obviously we follow that stuff. We've got the Ukrainian flag there up there in the corner.
Yes.
And support those people. We actually had comments today about that. There's Sony saying, I love Ukraine. He's from Pakistan. It says, Russia President Putin is callous. I would say that is an understatement. But yes, when you get into propaganda and what can drive it and fund these things, lots of money went into these programs.
Yeah, not as much very little in the United States certainly compared to the Soviet Union and Russia. It was only a little over 22 million over 22 years. So that's not much with the number of personnel and everybody else who was involved. That's less than they spent on toilets for the Pentagon,
Right.
Just screws for those toilets. I had a question out in the audience. Leandra Jean RS says, I see angels are at least spirits, or sometimes they are like outlines of white figure, very faint, though I don't know if I'm just crazy or actually seeing them walk around.
I just answered that.
Do you think that the seeing, do you want to give us some insight on the seeing of apparitions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, apparitions are not seen with the eyes. They're seen with think of it as seen with our psychic eye. We perceive and we incorporate that information into our visual image of the world. So the thing to remember is that what our eyes see is not actually total reality. There's a perceptual process that happens when the information goes into the eyeball and hits the retina and then hits the optic nerve, and then it's processed in the brain based on our perceptions and how we see things and how we've learned to see things over our lives. So when you get information through ESP, which includes seeing spirits or communicating with spirits, it gets incorporated in your perception, and it can be just in the mind's eye, or it can be that it looks like it's external, almost like a superimposed image on a green screen. That's kind of what it is. So apparitions are not optical phenomena. We know that for a fact. We know that.
Yes.
If they were optical phenomena, then everyone in the room, when an apparition is seen by one person, would be seen by everybody.
Right. And it doesn't work that way.
In the right direction. Yeah.
No,
so that doesn't
happen. Group of people, and maybe only a couple see the apparition.
Right.
Oh, I saw that. That
and other people might be hearing something, and other people might be feeling a presence. So in other words, our individual perceptions process that.
Exactly. So, everybody's unique.
Right.
They seem to be up for manipulation, though, in a way.
It is up for manipulation. I mean, our brains manipulate that. The perceptual process manipulates it. So in actuality, somebody seeing the outline of a shape or a shadow, for that matter, that may be an actual apparition or a bit of a recording, some of the residual. But for whatever reason, you're getting the information, but your brain's not processing it. So you're getting a fuzzy image or an outline. You're getting a partial image, essentially. Mm-hmm. It hasn't come into sharp focus. So it doesn't mean necessarily, first of all, I have a real problem. Like people say they see a shadow figure and they're scared. It's like, why are you afraid of a shadow? Are you afraid of your shadow?
Right. Well,
I mean, just because it's dark doesn't mean it's bad. And I have to say that one of the biggest problems is that a very bright light can blind you, but a shadow will not.
Right. That's true.
What if you're clairsentient and you have this shadow figure and it's, you can feel the negativity from it?
Well, I can feel negativity from people I've met. And just because it's negative emotion doesn't mean that it means you harm.
Right. There do seem to be an awful lot of shadow people, I don't know, negative stories. But then they are presented as something that maybe wasn't fully formed, or there's lots of reasons for them. I mean,
there's a lot of reasons why people might be perceiving shadows. One of them is that they're not actually external sources, that they are, for example, low frequency sound can cause you to see shadows out of the corner of your eyes.
Okay.
They'll vibrate, something at 18 hertz or 19 hertz will vibrate the eyeball and you'll see shadows. And that is not external. I mean, the sound is external, but your perception is internal at that point. So there's that. There's also the hearing a sound. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people who've told me they've had local ghost hunting groups come and tell them that there was a demon in their home because they got an EVP that sounded like a growl.
That's
right. Yeah.
And clearly that's a demon,
it's just data. And
it's not even, well, first of all, you'd have to make sure that wasn't somebody's stomach growling. That's
exactly.
There's that piece of it. I know that there was a couple of years ago, there were some folks who were investigating some closed building in Ohio or someplace. And they claimed to have recorded EVP of demon dogs or demon animals. So this building was open to the outside, and there were, if you look at the news reports, there were wild dogs in the area, and that they got barking and growling at a distance. They assumed were EVPs, but in fact, they were more likely wild dogs that were actually there. So to make those kind of determinations is really crazy. And then you have, of course, the ghost hunters who go into a place, start yelling at the ghost. And,
don't torment them.
And I love to hear people say, well, it must be a demon because it said get out.
We have a series on we have a lot of that get outs, but we have like a documentary series called the D word series, and we call it the dreaded D word because it's so overused.
It's ridiculous. Well, and in fact,
it's very overused.
But I know that with some of the groups, after I found out what they actually did before they got that EVP, which may not even be a real EVP from a spirit, but their behavior was such that if I was the ghost, they would have been lucky for me to just say, get out.
Yeah.
I would have gone after them and, just kick them out of the house. So that's not demonic. That's dealing with rude people.
Absolutely. We agree with that. Yes. 100%.
Absolutely. And if that's, if you're actually encountering spirit, but I was just showing this recorder we use as like a Tascam because they're just work so well. When you talk about a dog outside, it's a block away and it's barking or growling loudly. Things like this will pick that up, and you should keep that in mind as a way to debunk the data that you've collected.
You need to have multiple recorders going. You need to make sure that they're not all picking things up. The best thing to do is to use a recorder that has the microphone disabled. Because EVP technically should work even if there's no mic.
Right. Well, we had this experience. We love to tell this story.
Yes.
Where we had, I had Kristen walking with this, and she had nice headphones on like these, where she couldn't really hear anything outside of what was coming through the recorder. And I'm walking next to her, and we had a spirit box set up about 30 feet behind us with another recorder, and we were just walking to the edge of this particular location. And we heard a voice yell at both of us. We both jumped up in the air.
There was
hello.
No one around.
We thought somebody had pulled up and was like yelling at us, and we were freaking out. Like, oh, what happened? And when we played the recorders back, it wasn't on there at all.
Right.
That was like the paranormal thing. And
it was another recorder going, and it did not pick it up.
But we had the experience, and the experience was so profound, and it was so loud to us.
Yeah.
That was more paranormal than anything we got that day,
At one of the places I've worked with for a long time, the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant, I was there back in 2004 with a psychic medium I work with who had done a communication session with the ghosts. And after lunch, were downstairs. It was middle of the week during the off season. There was nobody downstairs in the indoor patio at all. And all of a sudden, as we're recording our conversation, I hear a female voice saying, "Hi, Lloyd," just off to my left. Mm-hmm. Glass window, nobody there, nobody in the room, right? And Ankasha, the psychic, looks up at me and says, "She said something, didn't she?" And she didn't get what she said, what the ghost said, but she got that. So we go back on over the tape, nothing. There's nothing there. Yeah. But we both heard it clearly. Yeah, right, it was a psychic experience. That's what these things are. They are psychic experiences, why you can't record them unless the entity or you affects the device itself. Some EVP may even be caused by the operators, not by spirits.
Oh, often. I think people whisper a lot of times.
Oh, yeah. That's,
but I'm
actually working in a group of people and somebody whispers, "Hey," and then they play it back.
But I'm actually talking about psychokinesis, about a PK effect.
Oh, okay. Oh, they're manipulating
unconsciously manipulating the thing because they really want EVP. Yeah. Yeah,
I would say that's absolutely true. Sure. And like you said, the belief system, I think, plays a role in all of that too. If you go in and you don't think you're going to get anything, you're probably not going to get anything,
Right. Well, there's that belief factor too. You can also block from getting anything pretty easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. I've blocked out a lot of stuff.
Maybe even including some of those shadow people. But that jury's out on that one. And we get all kinds of opinions about that, but it is strange how there are a lot of people that report that phenomena, particularly with the hats. And I don't think, shadow.
Yeah. I think I tend to think it's I see somebody here who's putting in there, it's people from our subconscious, one of the Jungian archetypes is the shadow figure. So that is a psychological archetype for Western people. And I would suspect that is a projection from somebody's unconscious, and maybe it's a projection of their fears or something else that's going on. And perhaps other people can pick that up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. I imagine people project a lot of stuff, and Jungian talked about the archetypes. Yeah. And, we see those archetypes, in all sorts of phenomena, really.
Yeah.
We could talk about things like old hag syndrome is sort of an
right. Yes, sleep paralysis, which is not an unusual phenomenon, not an unusual experience from people. And actually, what people talk about as sleep paralysis is actually a malfunction of sleep paralysis, because we are all in sleep paralysis when we're dreaming.
Right. The body releases chemicals, does it not, to keep us still, keep our muscles
Exactly. So when you have somebody sitting on your chest, when you think you have somebody waking up, it's not much different than when you wake up and your leg is like, you can't even feel your leg because it's so numb at that point. It's just you haven't come out of sleep paralysis altogether, so your torso is not awake yet, more or less, and it feels like pressure.
Right. I have to tell you, I did have an experience like this, and I didn't know about the old hag, and this was a long time ago. But I kept seeing this crone, and I felt like I was drowning. She wasn't sitting on my chest.
She was trying to drown him.
I wasn't in the water though, but it just felt like I was drowning, right? And I kept seeing this face, this archetypical crone. I wasn't consciously aware, and I can't say subconsciously because maybe I had read this somewhere about old hag, but yet I saw her, and then later, it would be years later, I would come across that, and it was like hundreds of years of this history around this crone figure.
Right. I get going back to the thought form idea. I personally don't have a problem, thinking that there's information floating around that's not conscious, but it's embedded in our culture. It's embedded in us as human beings. Kind of what Jung talked about as archetypes, which can change from interpretation from culture to culture. But we pick stuff up and our brains immediately interprets it that way. The whole idea of death in a hooded death skeleton figure with a scythe and the whole bit doesn't go back. I mean, it goes back a ways, but it's European in origin. It's not worldwide. When people think about death or talk about death,
that's a very interesting thing right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we have your website up, and
where are the best places to find you, Lloyd?
So one is my Facebook page, which is Loyd.Auerbach.author on Facebook. And from there, also, I always announce when I'm going to be doing every other week, I do a Ask Professor Paranormal 1 hour Facebook Q&A. Next one will be next Sunday.
Those are very good, by the way. We watched you last
Yes.
time.
Thank you.
When is the next? I'm sorry. When is the next
one?
one?
Is next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
Yes, that's May 1st at 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. And you can watch it on my author page. It's actually hosted by The Live Paranormal. So facebook.com, The Live Paranormal by their site.
Okay.
And it's actually webcast, put across, shared with other pages that I have or other people's pages. But I can only respond to comments on those 2 pages because I can't watch 15 pages at one time.
Yes, I understand that. That's what I'm doing right now.
Give the problem. So that's one place. The other place is on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Prof Paranormal, as in Professor Paranormal, or at Loyd Auerbach is the easiest thing to do. And those are really the main social media that I use. I also do use LinkedIn as well to put information out. My website's been under reconstruction. I'm working with somebody right now. I had a developer, and then I fell apart. And I had another one after the person hosting it took a dive.
Yeah. Sorry.
So anyway, those are the best places. And then I do have a YouTube channel, just youtube.com/Loyd Auerbach, which has a number of my TV appearances on it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And also, this goes into a audio podcast on Wednesday to
our Paranormal UK Radio Network. So yeah, this will get lots of playbacks and stuff,
yes.
And we really appreciate you coming on.
It's
been a lot of fun. I know we were talking about taking a break and we didn't get a chance. So
no, that's all right. I will mention one of the places that people should go. We've got the Rhine stuff we've talked about, the Rhine Education Center, but also the Forever Family Foundation, which is foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Darn it, I wrote that down too.
It's an all-volunteer nonprofit organization that supports the work of spirit mediums in the family grieving process and supports the work of scientists doing research on life after death. It's free to join.
And it's called...
It is free to join. It's foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Excellent.
Love it. All right. Yeah, we'll put that also in our notes because that's a great cause. And we love your work.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great stuff.
Thank you very much.
You really do.
This has been a ton of fun. To stay with us, we're just going to wrap up and close out the show.
Yep.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you for joining us. And thank you, audience of Bigfoot and the Bunny this week. Anne-Marie Young, Bob Burnell, Sony, Greg Koss, Liz Milne, Robert Honings, all you guys,
Courtney Peterson.
We love you. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back on Thursday. We have Dark Horse Paranormal Podcast Thursday night, and we're talking to John Yost, who is a very interesting. He's got a new documentary coming out. I believe it's called Alien Abduction Answers. I've got all kinds of clips and stuff we'll be posting on our Facebook pages, so keep an eye on those Facebook pages, Bigfoot and the Bunny and Dark Horse Paranormal. Learn a little bit about that documentary and for Thursday and Saturday.
That's right. Is Godsmack. I'm sorry, we're not going to be here on Saturday.
That's right. We're going to a concert on next Saturday, so we won't have Bigfoot and the Bunny. We're going to be at the Godsmack concert.
I'm going to see Godsmack for the first time in
going to be a lot of fun.
Life,
So thank you so much.
Yes. Thanks, guys.